So firstly, Paul, after 2.5 years with this trial and the possibility of life imprisonment hanging over your head, how do you feel now today, having been found not guilty?
I feel relieved. I mean, when the jury came back and we knew that there was going to be at least one verdict, and then I stood up to receive the verdict, and then we got the not guilty verdict, I mean, I felt relief. I felt an enormous gratitude and thanks to the jury, because under significant pressure, they stood up to lies, they saw them for what they were, and they defended not only our right to protest, but everybody's right to protest. And then I have to say the next sentiment I had was a sentiment of anger towards the guards, towards Joan Burton, towards the Labour Party, towards the political establishment, those who drove this process, those who told lies, those who gave fabricated statements. And a sense that, okay, we've been vindicated now, and that's not justice yet. We're just back to where we started in terms of being found not guilty. Justice will come through the exposure of the conspiracy that took place, and will come through the dropping of the charges for all the rest of the defendants who are currently waiting.
And as the trial went on, it seemed that the prosecution focused on you in particular. They tried to present you as a ringleader, as a Pied Piper of Jobstown. Why do you think that they focused on you so much?
Yeah, I think one of the lawyers made a very good telling point. I think it was Creed Naidu, who's the senior counsel for Kieran Mahan. He said, in the prosecution's closing statement, they said, this is nothing to do with politics. Leave the politics outside the door. And he said to the jury, they don't want you to think that this is political. But you have to ask yourself, if this isn't political, why are public enemies number 1, number 2, and number 3 public representatives for the same anti-austerity party, Solidarity? And he could have added public enemy number 5, Frank Donaghy, who is also an activist with Solidarity. And so I think what this was about, this was an attack on the working class community of Jobstown. By extension, it was an attack on working class communities across the country. It was an attack on the anti-water charges movement and all those who would seek to protest. But it was also an attack on the left and on Solidarity in particular. And I think that's why I come into focus to such a degree, is because for some of the establishment, and I'd say for some of the guards, because of the by-election, and because of the connection of that by-election to the mass movement of non-payment, mass civil disobedience, mass protest, that brought them ultimately to defeat on the issue of water charges, that I became a bit of a symbol for them of everything that's wrong, of the potential rise of the left, of working class getting out of its box, fighting back, feeling a bit of confidence. And so I think it was about, it wasn't ultimately about me or about anyone. It was about sending messages to people. And we were very useful vehicles and victims in that attempt to send a message.
And if you would have been convicted, you could have been kicked out of the Dáil, as the rules state that you can't be a TD if you're serving a prison sentence of more than 6 months. Do you think that this was a motivation for the establishment and say for Joan Burton and the Labour Party who wanted you out of the way?
I mean, we can't know the exact motivations of Joan Burton or the guards or whatever, but I think in general terms it was informed by a fear of the rise of the left, a fear of working class communities fighting back, and an attempt to send people a very, very strong message. I definitely think for the Labour Party, the rise of and the potential rise of a new left to replace the Labour Party is something that worried them very, very substantially, and for that reason they wanted to strike blows. I also think it had a strategic purpose in terms of the anti-water charges movement, because this protest took place at a time of the rising wave of the movement. You had 100,000 on the streets on the 11th of October, you had 150 to 200,000 on the 1st of November. Then this protest took place on the 15th of November. So it was an attempt to split the anti-water charges movement, and I'd also say create a certain cordon sanitaire around Solidarity, around the left, to paint us as being criminal, to try to cut across that rise.
But this case couldn't have got this far just based on a vendetta of Joan Burton or the Labour Party. Obviously, Senior Gardaí chose to follow up on this case, and the DPP chose to pursue it. Why do you think that there's such bias against Solidarity within the state?
I mean, I think there's not much question that there was a conspiracy here, and that can sound, a bit over the top or a bit mad or whatever. But it was a question that was put to good effect by my senior counsel, Sean Gearan, to the top guard on the day. And the reason for that is because the evidence seems to suggest it. how else do you have 3 guards taking the witness box and saying they heard the same thing that they couldn't possibly have heard? 3 guards of different ranks up to superintendent said they heard me say, will we keep her here for the night, when I never said it, and the video evidence that they didn't know we had showed that I didn't say it. How else do you explain the fact that at least 2 guards had false statements in their statements in the book of evidence, which went to the DPP, which was effectively trying to pin me for orchestrating the protest and orchestrating violence at the protest, things that they didn't even attempt to stand over in the court because they knew it would be challenged and exposed. And so I do think it points to a conspiracy at some level to stitch us up for false imprisonment, to try to get us, in the first place, to try to get prosecutions to proceed by giving false information to the DPP, and in the second place, to try to get convictions. I think the only question, and it remains for, I would say, an independent investigation to look at, is how high did it go? I think it's not far-fetched to think it went as high as the superintendent who was present on the day. I think it's not far-fetched to think did it go as high as the chief superintendent in the whole area, who's a guard called Orlin McPartlin, who just happens to be the same guard who refused what was then the Anti-Austerity Alliance, a collection permit a year ago, saying that we would use it for illegal, could encourage the commission of illegal acts. She was the guard who was chairing the conference of the guards talking about processing this. And I think it's not even far-fetched to raise the question about does it go as high as the Garda Commissioner herself, Noreen O'Sullivan. We know they're embroiled in one scandal after another. We know political policing has been rife. We know her husband was responsible for Operation Mizzen, which involved the surveillance of anti-water charges protesters, including myself. And so I think it's not really a question of if there was a conspiracy. I think there was. I think the question is how high did it go?
So why do you think that the media and the state have attacked the left? Obviously in Britain we've seen the media campaign against Corbyn, and here we've seen the state come down against Solidarity. Why exactly do you think that's happening?
The context for this is 10 years of global economic capitalist crisis, and then the austerity policies that were supposedly to resolve it, but in reality were about resolving the crisis from the point of view of the rich and a transfer of wealth further to them, the consequences of which we see in the 300 richest people going from 50 billion before crisis to over 100 billion now. And those policies have undermined the so-called political centre, in reality the extreme centre of the right, the neoliberal right, in pretty much every country around the world, included in this country. And in many other countries, you have the rise of movements of what is usually lumped under the catch-all term of populism, be it of the right, radical right, fascistic right, in some countries, scarily, but also in other countries of the left, be it Mélenchon in France, be it Bernie Sanders in the US, be it Podemos in Spain, be it Jeremy Corbyn within the Labour Party. And I do think that there's a concern by the establishment in this country, and it's reflected in the way they talk about us, the amount of, in a sense, disproportionate airtime given to attacking us in the editorials and so on. It's reflected in Leo Varadkar. One of his first things that he did as Taoiseach was to attack the speaking time of the left. That I think they're concerned that there's obviously the basis for the building of a substantial left in this country, and which could pose a serious challenge to their way of doing things, which precisely could argue for putting the needs of the many, as Jeremy Corbyn puts it, before the few. And I think to some extent this was like a preemptive strike to try to prevent the left growing in the way that there certainly would seem to be the potential to be.
Okay, so obviously we're very happy today with the not guilty outcome, and we hope that the charges against the other defendants will be dropped. But we've had a victory today. We've managed to take on the forces of the state and win. What's next for the left in Ireland?
Well, the first thing is to thank everybody who came to the court, who participated in our defence, all the trade unionists, the MEPs, the TDs, the senators. The support we received was overwhelming, including the support we received on social media. So we will, celebrate our victory, enjoy our victory, try and draw out the lessons of our victory. And then, as is always the best approach, attack is the best form of defence. We'll try and use this as a launching pad to say that a substantial, broad left needs to be built in this country. That everybody who stands for a society based on the interest of the majority as opposed to the 1% at the top should come together. Everybody who stands for a woman's right to choose, everybody who stands for those kind of policies based on people power movements from below, and those who believe in turning society effectively upside down, saying the wealth and resources should be in the hands of the majority instead of the minority. We need to come together, and Solidarity will be launching that call, the idea that we come together on the streets, we come together in movements, and we come together in terms of elections to try to pose the most serious challenge possible to fight for, and to pose the need for in this country a left government. And that doesn't mean a left government, it doesn't mean parties in coalition with Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael or whatever. It means fighting for a government that actually operates in the interest of the majority.